My impression was that, well, I know for a fact that intelligence was carefully used by the White House. I received the President's daily briefing each morning. I know he was very assiduous in reading that before he came over to the office. That was something he had already completed before he came to the office, as I remember. I also spent a lot of time with Bill Casey, just because we had worked together in the campaign, but also on overall strategy. My understanding of intelligence would be much more as a user, but much less involved, other than having this information be part of the general discussion in the NSC meetings. That would be primarily where I would come into it, and most of the information would be portrayed by other people who had been in turn or prior to that briefed by the CIA in some way. So I didn't have much direct contact with the CIA. I did with Bill, but it was more on policy matters rather than on intelligence matters per se.
Well, we're very interested in the policy deliberations and the discussions. Those, if you could recall, specific areas where what CIA and the National Intelligence Council and the intelligence community in general were able to help in the policy deliberations with product.
Yeah. Well, my recollection is that a lot of the information that would come to us would be more conclusory information about the Soviet Union, or about Nicaragua, for example, or about El Salvador, things like that, rather than, strictly speaking, intelligence reports. Now, there would be times when a particular intelligence report might be referred to, or that something might be used as the basis for somebody's making a presentation. But there wasn't, as I say, we were one step removed, really, from the direct intelligence briefings, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Other than, of course, with the PDB.
Right.
And occasionally there would be some sort of an intelligence document that we might have been distributed to us, but I don't think that happened very often. I can't remember that happening very often.
Okay.
It's just like when I was the Attorney General, for example. Most of this would have come to my national security assistant, who was a Navy commander, Navy lieutenant commander, and she in turn would be briefing me, but in the context of a total policy briefing on a particular subject, rather than isolating intelligence per se out.
Right. When you were reading the PDB, was it your impression that this was a document that was serving the President's needs?
Yeah. My recollection is that it was. And the other thing that we would get would be the National Security Assistant, Dick Allen, Bill Clark, and so on. They would often, in our national security briefing at 9:30 in the morning, they would often bring up things where they had received intelligence, and they would talk about information that they had received.
You mentioned that Ronald Reagan was an assiduous reader of the PDB.
Yeah.
Were you aware of longer, let's say, national intelligence estimates that came to his attention? Were these discussed in policy deliberations?
Yeah, I have a vague recollection that they were. It's been a long time.
Yes, it has.
But they were, particularly about the Soviet Union. Primarily in 1982, although there was some in 1981, but in 1982, a lot of attention was spent to long-range strategic planning with the Soviet Union. There was a good deal of that also in 81. With 81, it was more immediate things that had to be done, and whereas in 82, the long-range strategic planning and the national security decision directives relating, I think the 175 comes to mind, but I'm not sure that's correct these days, about how we would deal with the Soviet Union on a long-range basis. And that, of course, was based to a great extent on intelligence, on the economic situation there, the military situation, this sort of thing.
you had to face a great changeover in Soviet leadership.
Right.
And I know, because I've been looking at it myself, we've produced a lot of assessments, speculations on the issue of the Soviet succession and Soviet leadership. Do you have recall any impressions of whether that was helpful in helping you deal with that?
It was, and I remember those discussions at the NSC, at the meetings. And as you say, as President Reagan said, the leaders kept dying on him. And so we had Brezhnev, Andropov, and Chernenko in a very short period of time there.
Yes.
And then Gorbachev, of course, in '85.
One of the delivery vehicles that we used at the time was film. We would actually produce a film regarding a trip that the president would be making, or on a particular foreign leader. And of course, the buzz in the outside world was that Reagan didn't read and that he just watched movies, which we all know is not the case.
Right.
But we did produce these films, and do you recall ever seeing any yourself?
I recall those, and I recall that they were very helpful.
How so?
Well, they would give, well, particularly information on the foreign leader. They would give background information. They also would give a certain amount of, if I remember correctly, statistical data and things like that. I can remember seeing, I can't remember all the content, but it was basically not exactly a travel log, but to a certain extent, that kind of type information about the country, the people there, and then about who he was going to be meeting with. That's what I recall.
That's very good.
And the interesting thing is, those generally would not be shown in the Situation Room. They'd usually be shown in the Cabinet Room or someplace where he was preparing for the trip.
The relationship between the DCI, Bill Casey, and the president, how important was that when it comes to the quality of the intelligence?
Well, I thought the relationship was very important, and it was one of those where Bill could go in and see the president at any time, and often would have a meeting that would be arranged by Dick Allen or Bill Clark, and to keep the president up to date on anything that he thought was particularly important. I met with Bill on a number of occasions, but it was more to facilitate something they might need, getting somebody appointed or something like that, the administrative mechanics, rather than him coming in particularly. I would be in the meetings with the president, but rather than having something special that he would bring into me of a substantive intelligence nature.
Bill Casey was the first national intelligence director to have cabinet-level status.
Right.
And what is your assessment of that situation?
Well, that came more out of the fact that he had been so prominent in the campaign, and therefore had policy views, and also his experience. His experience had been very broad in terms of what he had done in the Nixon White House. He'd been the Undersecretary for Economic Affairs in the State Department. He'd had some other job, I think, along the way. President of the XM Bank, I think, or
SEC as well,
and the SEC, the SEC I was thinking of. So that was the reason why he was a member of the cabinet, rather than something that was inherent in being Director of Central Intelligence. As a matter of fact, when Bill Webster took over after Bill Casey had passed away, Bill chose, or asked the president that he not be a member of the cabinet because he wanted to separate intelligence from policy making. And so I believe he did not serve as a member of the cabinet.
That is correct.
On the other hand, he did serve as the statutory advisor, as the Director of Central Intelligence in the NSC.
That's right. Intelligence is just one of what we call the four main functions, and I know President Reagan was particularly interested also in counterintelligence and the role of counterintelligence.
Right.
And from your position as Attorney General, of course, you dealt with that.
Right.
Can you reflect on the President's interest in what we call CI, counterintelligence?
Yeah. Well, he was, obviously he was interested as a matter of national security, to be sure that we were taking the steps, and this was a period when a number of spies were discovered, and so that was an important part of it. I would say that the my understanding or my recollection is that counterintelligence overseas was the function of the CIA.
Yes.
Counterintelligence within the United States was the function of the FBI.
Absolutely.
But obviously there's an overlap between those two, I don't remember any particular problems, but most of the things that I remember as Attorney General were dealing with the FBI on counterintelligence. But there were some things, and of course the main things I remember about CIA was the whole issue on the hostages that had been taken. The President was very interested in that. I also remember them coming to me asking to use DEA agents because in the Middle East there was a paucity of CIA people in the field, and they thought that maybe some of the DEA agents would have information that would be helpful to supplement what the CIA had there.
That's interesting.
That would probably have been in probably in '86 or so, '86 or '87, thereabouts.
Okay. If there was something about our current intelligence system that should be changed, based on your experience, what would you recommend to do our jobs better?
Well, I've been away from it for quite a while. One thing that has concerned me is the proliferation of people in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. My thought when they created that spot was that it would be more a matter of bringing together the work from the other agencies and collating it, organizing it, and putting it in a usable fashion for the users, particularly the President and the members of the NSC. But what I understand has grown up is almost a parallel analysis group. They don't do any collecting, but they have a parallel analysis group from what I understand. And I don't know, I would have questions about how that works out. Simply because we get so many people in it. And my feeling has always been that the President ought to get not homogenized intelligence, but he ought to get intelligence even when, and if there's conflict between various entities, agencies that are involved, he ought to get the benefit of the conflict being reflected in the reports that he gets, with the usual information as to the quality of the source and the reliability of the information, those kind of things I remember from my military intelligence background.
That's right.